Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Watkins, and I serve as Associate Dean for Lifelong Learning here at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And I want to welcome you to Cultivating Ideas, our monthly webinar series where we feature the best and the brightest ideas of our faculty and staff here at Austin Seminary. And I am super excited for today. I've had the distinct honor and privilege of knowing Melissa from the first day I started working here until now. She previously was the director of Education Beyond the Walls, which morphed into lifelong learning. And in that process, Melissa has been a mentor and a guide for me to help me understand both the Presbyterian world, Austin Seminary as a whole, and together what it means to serve this generation and future generations of students and leaders. I'm mentioning all that because she is also the founder of Cultivating Ideas. And one of my goals from day one when I started in this position was to say, Melissa, I want you to speak at Cultivating Ideas. And so she was very kind. She gave a wide berth. She's like, Sean, it's your baby. You can envision it how you want to. And I was like, yep. And my vision is for you to speak at Cultivating Ideas. And so this is both a bit of a hope and a dream fulfilled for me. I'm very excited for her. She is talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So I am not just an associate dean today. I get to be a student and a fanboy. With that being said, Melissa Wiginton serves as Vice President for Strategic Engagement and Partnerships here at Austin Seminary. She led the design and leads implementation of three major grants serving congregations: the 787 Collective, an innovation hub for connecting young adults and communities of faith; Houses of Hope, an initiative for transformation for small town and rural congregations; and the Austin Story Project, a focus rather on a fresh way to tell stories of a life with God. Ms. Wiginton earned a Master's of Divinity degree from Candler School of Theology at Emory University. She has a Juris Doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin Law School and a Bachelor's of Arts in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. She is a member of the United Methodist Church, and today she will be talking to us about the healing power of storytelling. Ladies and gentlemen, our own Vice President, Melissa Wiginton. Melissa, take it away.
Okay, Sean, thank you so much for that introduction. And welcome, everyone. I'm really delighted to be with you and talk today about the healing power of storytelling. And I'm going to start with a story. Every night, Rosalie follows the same bedtime routine. She pulls her little step stool over in front of the sink. She climbs up on it. She brushes her teeth. She climbs down. She sits on the potty. She climbs back on the step stool. She washes her hands. She climbs down. She dries her hands. She goes to her room where she sets up her toys and her stuffies in a very intricate map that exists only inside her own head. She crawls on top of the covers, and one parent comes in and reads her something from Highlights magazine. That parent leaves. Rosalie crawls under the covers. The other parent comes in and snuggles beside her, and Rosalie says, "Tell me a story about when you were a kid, and it has to be true and it can't be sad. Tell me a story about when you were a kid, and it can't be, and it has to be true, and it can't be sad." What is this child asking for when she asks that question? What is happening in the storytelling and the listening that is so compelling that she asks that question every single night? Well, my guess is you have some thoughts about this, and I want to share with you some of mine. I think, first of all, she's asking for just the pure pleasure of being very close to someone who loves her and having their attention. I think she's asking for that kind of connection that happens in that closeness and attention. And I think she's asking for a sense of belonging, What is the story that I belong to, that came before me, that's happening now, that's going to continue? What kind of people are we? How do we navigate the world? She's asking for meaning making. How did you solve problems when you were a kid that caused it to turn out well? I think there's also something in here that she's asking about identity. You know, who am I connected to you and different from you? And who am I in the relation to the other characters that show up in your story? But I think there's also something that happens with the parents in this telling and listening, because for them to tell the story, they go back into that childhood moment and they relive that. And then they have to make some choices about how they tell the story. Where does it start and where does it end so that it's not sad? And then what does that mean to them as an adult to reimagine that story told in that way? I think in these observations, this sort of list of characteristics, we find some clues to the healing power of stories. We certainly find some clues about stories. The telling and the listening create belonging. They open to transformation and they invite enchantment. These experiences are salves to our loneliness, our wounds, and our broken places. And if all healing comes from the great physician, stories are treatments. Stories mediate healing. Now, stories that are medicine have certain qualities. First of all, they always include a teller and a listener. There's a teller and a listener. They are not performances. They're not stand-up performances. The kind of listening that happens in these stories is really, really important. We call it sometimes holy listening. It's a kind of listening that is both full of presence and full of emptiness because the listener is open. They're not they're not listening to say, "Wait, did you say Brownsville? Because my in-laws were from Brownsville." You know, they're not listening to say at the end, "I think I know some cream that can help you with that rash you mentioned, and it's over the counter." No, they're listening with their hearts. They are not talking. And after the story is told, they simply say, "Thank you." Just thank you, because they have received a gift of going outside of their own life for some brief moment to enter into and be held in another person's experience and just to let that be. But there's also something that happens to the teller. The teller has also received a gift. Can you imagine? And I want so bad to go into breakout groups, y'all, and have you tell some stories. It's just killing me, but I can't figure out how to do it. So if we did, what you would experience as a teller is what it's like to have another person's full, respectful, open, and accepting attention, to just listen to you. And when that happens, it makes a space for, at least for me, for my shy soul to come out from its protective cave and to be known. And if somebody looks and taps their watch because they just got an email on there, or they peer around behind me, wave at somebody, that crushes my soul and that kills that vulnerability. So this kind of listening is such a gift to the storyteller because it allows the spell that's being cast in the telling of the story to sustain. That's the gift that the teller receives. Now, my friend Mark Yaconelli says a story heals depending on the integrity and compassion of the teller and the openness of the listener. And let me say, footnote here, I'm drawing from 4 sources in this little talk, and at the end, we're going to put them in the chat. Okay, so you can get the sources because they're full of so much more than I can convey to you. But that's what Mark says. Stories that heal depend on the vulnerability, the integrity and compassion of the teller and the openness of the listener. Okay, other thing about healing stories, they're not just a recitation of facts. I don't know how many of you have a relative, probably an uncle in your family, who's going to say something like, well, we headed out on I-10 and we pulled over at that Shell station at the Wildwood exit, you know that one, and got gas, and then we headed on up, but there was a detour at I-40. Y'all, that's not really a story, okay? That's telling what happened. But if the uncle says, you know, for some reason your aunt was real nervous about this trip. We'd hardly started when she insisted we pull over for gas, and I had filled up yesterday. But she just fidgeted with her purse and with the air conditioner. And finally, after about 50 miles, she just said, Earl, there's something I've got to tell you. And I felt like I had been kicked in the gut by a horse. Okay, now we're in. Now we're in. We're in the car with my aunt and uncle. And we want to know what is going to happen. This is a story that has power because it conveys the thickness, the detail, the smell, you know, the feeling. I can just feel that air conditioner going up and down and up and down. We know what it's like to be in that world. And stories that have the power to heal move in that way. They have, you know, a conflict happens. It gets worse. It gets better. There's resolution. There is life in these stories. The last thing I'll say about stories that mediate healing is that they are not told to entertain. All right? They might be entertaining, of course, but that's not their sole purpose. And the poet W.H. Auden says this, which I find really helpful. He says, there must always be 2 kinds of art. Escape art, for humans need escape as we need food and deep sleep. And there must be parable art, which shall teach us to unlearn hatred and learn love. And I love a good escape. Come to my house. I'll show you my list of what I watch on, you know, the channels I'm supposed to unsubscribe to now because of the politics. But I also love and need the stories that teach me to unlearn hatred and learn love. And those are the ones that have the power to heal. So these are the characteristics of stories with the power to heal. And my friend Mark calls these folk medicine. These stories are folk medicine. And I want to talk now a little bit about how they do their healing work. So interestingly, like a lot of folk medicine, it turns out scientists have proven that, yeah, folk medicine works. The things that we expected to happen when we do something actually happen. And storytelling and listening are some of that. And they have been proven to have benefits to our mental health, our physical health, and our stress resilience. So first, How do they work? Stories create belonging among people. We all know belonging is critical for our health. Former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy gave us the great shorthand for this when he said loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of what it does to our health. And stories treat loneliness. Here's what the studies show. When two people listen to the same story, the same parts of their brain get activated. So, like they measured people's brain waves. They were all 5 people sitting, waiting to hear this story. Their brains are all going different directions. The story starts, their brain waves start to sync up. And it's not just the audio cortices that sync up, it's the part of the brain that gets the story, that understands what it's about, that the part of the brain where thoughts and ideas are processed. So they said, well, let's try it with people who speak different languages. So they had one set of people who spoke English and one set who spoke Russian. They told the same story, but in the 2 different languages. Brain waves not syncing up. They start telling the story. The audio processing still didn't sync up, but the thoughts and ideas of what this story meant, those still were the same. The brain waves looked the same. And this is also true when you repeat a story. Somebody tells me a story, I tell it to somebody else, our brains still sync up. And so scientists say this research demonstrates the power of stories to connect us and foster understanding. Second, healing stories bring transformation. And here I'm going to focus really on what we have learned from narrative therapy. Okay, narrative therapy is a kind of psychological practice that is based on the assumption that change your story, you change your life. And really, what the science has proven is if you change your story, you can change your mental health. All right. Or you could change your story in a bad way and you impair your mental health, right? So these scientists, and I'm not a scientist. I'm pretending I know something about it because I've read about it. And my sister's a scientist, and she was going to come today, and I was so nervous, but at the last minute she couldn't make it. So I feel a little bit better that she's not going to be critiquing me. Okay, so what scientists did is they took thousands of stories, narratives that people had told in this narrative therapy, and they analyzed them for the themes that emerged in the stories, right? And they identified several themes that caused people to have improved mental health. And I'm going to tell you what these themes are. First one is agency, meaning a story that tells I have the ability to impact what happens in my life. I'm not just a victim. The second one is communion, by which they mean experiences of close, supportive relationships. I'm not alone. Third is redemption, stories that start out bad and end good. Y'all know what redemption is. The fourth one is called, great term, accommodative processing, which means, well, something new happens. How do I fit this into the big story of my life? How do I accommodate my story to process this new information? The fifth one is a story that's told with coherence. There's some temporal evolution of how the story is told. There's a psychological context. It hangs together. It's legible, if you can call a story that's told audibly legible. The sixth thing is the one that can go back, and it's called a theme of contamination. Things start out good and they go bad. Now, when I read these themes, I thought, I know these themes. These are the themes of Jesus' life. These are what we know of Jesus' soul story. This is the story of what happens to people when Jesus heals them. So I'm going to ask Michaela to put these themes in the chat and pause for a minute and let you look over this list and sort of see if your mind makes connections to any of the stories from our scripture. So I'm trying to wonder with you, what does this mean? These are the stories. These are the themes we know. We might have called them something different about life with God. And so here's the other, this is amazing good news that goes along with this. And that is these scientists looked at other variables, good scientists. They looked at other variables in the people's lives who told these stories. And these same themes held true as being positive impacts on mental health, except for number 6, no matter what the person's, whether they were rich or poor, whether they had a lot of education or a little education, no matter what their race was, no matter what their personality traits were. This is folk medicine that's available to everyone. It's a free gift of how we tell our stories for healing. Okay, the third thing about how these stories function that I've claimed is that storytelling invites enchantment. And I'm going to speak in a little bit of a generality here, but I am not fearful of successful contradiction. We live in a world flattened by consumerism and overinflated with information. Our culture encourages us to dwell in the solipsistic identity construction project with reference to very little outside ourselves other than what we may see on a screen. Philosopher Charles Taylor gives us the term to describe this of the buffered self. And he is describing the way in which ourselves are buffered from any impact outside of us. The buffered self is distinct from anything else. It's self-contained. It's individual. It's unshaped by and resistant to the influence of nature, of human connection, or of spirit. The self is boundaried. It does not see itself as part of the natural world or of the family of humanity. And this is our legacy because once that, emperor of the Enlightenment took the throne, all mystery was vanquished from the kingdom. So there is no way mystery in and of itself can stand without the need to solve it. This is a way of thinking about our reality. It's not Charles Taylor, this is Melissa. I think it's destructive. I think it's deadening. I think it's death dealing. And I think healing stories pierce the buffer. Healing stories pierce that buffer that insulates us from whatever it is that's outside our own minds. Healing stories draw us into a different world and open us to the transcendent. They tell stories in which more is happening than can be put into words. I sat in a chair at the foot of the hospital bed talking to my father. Well, the chair was really pushed against the far wall. It was a plastic molded chair. We were talking. I was cold. The orderly brought in his dinner and rolled that tray that goes over the hospital bed up in front of him and raised his back. And still I sat against the wall. He could barely peel off that sealed aluminum top of the pudding. And he took that spoon and his hand shook and he could barely get the spoon from the container to his mouth. And then he looked at me and he said, "You don't like to feed me, do you?" I feel in another world as I tell that story. And I'm wondering where it took you and how that story will be told in completion as it becomes a healing story. That's what pierces that buffer. And those powerful stories of healing reveal something true. They make us porous to the beauty of nature, to the beauty of love, and we come alive. Healing stories create the experience of a world enchanted by the Spirit of God, in which compassion is the theme, communities are the character, and transformation is the plot. Okay, if stories, healing stories, are based on the integrity and compassion of the teller and the openness of the listener, I'm thinking what Rosalie does every night is a wellness practice. I think it's a wellness practice. And here's what researchers found. They researched children who were in intensive care, okay? And they measured their, and I'm looking at you, you're my medical expert. They measured their oxytocin, which is the good thing, brings you up, and they measured their cortisol, which also goes up, but it's very bad for you and distressing, right? And so they divided these kids into two groups. Half of them listened to stories for 30 minutes, and half of them did a riddling game. I feel worse just hearing that, okay? They did a riddling game, and they tested their blood before and after. And they found that the children who heard the stories had more oxytocin and less cortisol than the children who did the riddling game. All right? So I say storytelling is a wellness practice. And let me give you one other example. Uh, Researchers followed two groups of mothers. One of them parented children who were on the extreme end of the autism spectrum. The other group parented neurotypical children. And they had them, they followed them for 18 months, and they had them do parental stress scales and tell their story of parenting at the beginning of the 18 months and at the end of the 18 months. And they measured, and Anna, help me here if I need it. They measured what's called their telomeres. Okay. Now, telomeres are the little caps that go over our chromosomes. And when things happen over time in these, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but basically these telomeres get shorter. And so looking at the length of the telomere is one biological marker of aging. All right. And so they looked at the telomeres of these mothers, for over this 18 months. And all these, and what these mothers did was just tell their stories. Okay. They took their stories, they analyzed them for these themes we've talked about. Okay. Y'all with me? They found that the mothers who told stories that had integration and coherence, where whether they were whichever kind of child they were mothering, they had a story that helped them integrate this experience into their identity, into their life. They could make a meaning of it. Their telomeres were longer than the people who didn't have a story to tell about it. Okay? So it aged people to not have a healing story. The stories helped them stay well. The stories were healing. Now there's much more research. This is apparently a small study, but here's what the scientists said. This suggests the ability to integrate stressful events into one's identity through storytelling, and it's linked to biological and psychological stress resilience over time. Storytelling is a wellness practice. So as we come to the end of this time, I'm going to invite you to try this wellness practice, okay? And here's what I suggest. You find some people, okay? You've got to agree to integrity and compassion in the telling, and openness in the listening, and saying thank you after you listen. Okay, it's free. There's no special kit we're selling through the seminary to allow you to do this. And I'm going to give you some prompts that you might want to start with. Michael, would you list those prompts in the chat, please? 1, tell a story about a meal you shared with other people, a meaningful time together over food. You're thinking one right now, I can tell already. Second idea of a prompt, tell about a time you felt really free. It might have been just a little bit of time, but you felt really free. Or maybe it's a time you longed desperately to feel free. And then the third idea is tell about when you showed compassion to someone else. Surprisingly hard for people to do. Tell a story about when you showed compassion. See what happens. And may your listening and your telling create belonging, lead to transformation, invite enchantment, and may your telling and your listening be healing. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Melissa. My goodness, that was outstanding. Not to be completely heretical, but did not our hearts burn within us? My goodness. Yes, ma'am. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa, just for an outstanding presentation on the healing power of storytelling. Sisters and brothers, friends, and siblings, we've got about 25 minutes left for the time. So I'd ask you to do us a kindness. If you've got specific questions for Melissa, I want to invite you to drop those in the chat at this time as you were listening to her presentation. If questions emerge, I want to invite you to drop those in the chat. If you would like to ask them in person or audibly, I'm going to ask you both to turn your camera on and also to come off mute. We are recording this for the seminary's archive, so we want to make sure that we visually capture you as well as your voice. And so be thinking about those questions you want to ask Melissa as we get ready to transition to that time. Melissa, I've got a question for you just to be able to kickstart us. I love storytelling like you. I have a degree in African American Studies and History. I fell in love with history at UT Austin. Professor Fergie was his name. That was 24 years ago, and he taught the history of the Civil War. And we were running the class. Like he taught it like it was a soap opera. He just let the stories come alive. And that was when I recognized the power of stories. I'd fallen in love with superheroes and comic books when I was a kid. And so stories that always kind of resonated with me, of course, the gospel story growing up in a Christian family, and then history in college. And just it's been this overarching arc of my life of just the power of stories. When did you fall in love with storytelling? How did you come to realize what's been some high moments for you recognize there's just healing power in telling stories? I'd love for you to be able to share that. And then, folks, if you've got questions, please by all means present away.
Well, I come from a Southern family and we're storytellers. We
Mm,
are storytellers. We love telling stories. And I was trying to think of the first moment I realized the power of this. I think it was when I was in kindergarten. And I have a younger sister who would wait every day for me to come home. And I remember specifically one of the stories I told was about a kid, and I remember his name, David Williams. And this was long ago in the 20th century, y'all. And he would chase the girls and try to spank them. And I would come home and talk about David Williams chased the girls, and my little sister said, "I don't want to go to kindergarten because David Williams might spank me." And that's when I realized in some part of me, like I had invited her into this world. She thought she was part of this world because of the stories I told about it. And it's just, I've been going since then.
I,
I'm a sucker for stories. It
I
makes
love.
me so happy to hear people's stories.
Yeah, I know they're incredible. It makes everything come alive. So my when I was in seminary, one of our seminary professors said, the mind is not a library. You don't fill it with words, it's an art gallery. You have to hang pictures. And there's something about storytelling. It hangs pictures in people's minds so they can see and feel and understand. So thank you so much, Melissa. Just absolutely
Yeah,
amazing.
you're welcome.
Folks, do we have questions for Vice President Wigington from her presentation by
Yeah,
all?
I see James. Hi, James. I see your question.
Mhm.
Um, for me, I think, and this is probably partially my who I am, but I know my story by telling it, you know. And some of you may have had the experience, I know I have, of telling a story at one age in my life and then going back and trying to tell that story again, and it's not the same. And it's not because it's one of them wasn't true. It's because I get it in a different way. So I do think it's also important to say that in a lot of this research, they did expressive writing. Okay. So, James, I think, sometimes that practice of expressive writing helps you come to know what your story is in a way that telling it out loud it may not serve the same thing. And at one time, a guy asked me, "I don't know how to tell a story." And I just thought that is one of the saddest things I've ever heard. But he wanted to learn. He said, "How do I learn to tell a story?" I said, "Read stories, listen to stories, get the ear, you know." Um, but I don't know if that's helpful at all, James. But those are sort of my thoughts about it. Yeah.
For that, Melissa. Our own Zabindin chair, Ted Foote, has a question in the chat. He said, he wanted you to repeat something. He said, did you say that the Enlightenment displaced mystery? And if so, he said, might we over some years or centuries have the capacity of combining or hybridizing the positive benefits of both? So if the Enlightenment did in fact displace mystery, is it possible for us over time and centuries to combine both the beauty of what the Enlightenment offered and the recovery of mystery and the power of storytelling?
Yes. I mean, I think, of course, I did say, I was trying to make the point that there was a time in the world before the Enlightenment where people lived with a different sense of enchantment of the world around them. I have friends who just came back from Ireland, and they tell me this is what Ireland is like when they got out and they were with people who were, whose families had been there for centuries, and they don't see the same limitations of what's possible. They feel. I remember when we went to Hawaii, we were on the Mai Tai cruise boat, with the topless Italians on the back, and it was just a whole thing. And the Hawaiian guy who was running the boat was looking up at the hills, and he said, the Maui coastline, and he said, "Don't you just feel like sometimes they're watching you?" And I've never forgotten that because in that moment I did. And I felt like I knew, in that island, they stopped everything in the whole place to watch the sun go down. That kind of enchantment is something, I can't get off of I-35 traffic to pull into a strip mall to watch the sunset. It's just our lives are so depleted of those experiences, but I think there's a hunger for that. I think there's a reemergence of that. David White wrote a book called The Fire That Burns at the Center of the Earth, or Tending the Fire That Burns at the Center of the Earth, that's about beauty and how compelling it is to the life of God. And it's got to include, it's not just doctrine, it's not just beliefs, but I think the mistake has been thinking it has to be one over the other. And, hopefully we're in an age where there are some other possibilities. I don't
Most
know. Did that help you, Ted? Where'd you go?
He's in the chat. Yeah, that's such an excellent point too. I think when you look at the amount of money that's invested both in science and in research and kind of the fruit of the Enlightenment, using all five of the senses, and then simultaneously the billions of dollars that are invested in movies and in entertainment and in storytelling. There's something powerful about study, but also, like you mentioned, clearly, even in our polarized society right now, what brings people together is movies or television or a good story just arrests our attention. Thank you so much. Yep. Other folks, we have questions from Melissa. We've got time for a couple of more before we get out of Dodge.
Well, let me just say one more thing. In all this science research I read, I just kept thinking, well, you know, of course that's what you found because that's what's true. And, I'm very naive about this. I don't pretend to be more, but just from my little simple, Methodist mind, this is God being revealed. The scientists are discovering what comes from the logos, what is created. And in some ways, to my mind, that bridges that gap between mystery and having everything nailed down.
Absolutely amazing. That's wonderful. I think you have filled everyone's minds with ideas. So it's like we don't have any more questions. People are just kind of reflecting on this. And I think they're probably taking your homework quite seriously. So there are folks they need to be able to meet and exchange stories with and their own personal stories they need to reflect on. So that's a great place to be able to pause there. Melissa, I want to say thank you immensely for coming and for sharing today. This was a highlight. It exceeded my hopes and dreams and expectations. I knew you'd knock it out of the park, but thank you so much for speaking on a topic that is very near and dear to all of our hearts. It's just a part of the human culture, not even a Western or American or even Southern culture. There is power in storytelling. You're absolutely right. There, healing happens through our stories. And so I took copious notes. I'm sure our friends did as well as folks who will watch this and the rewatch as well too. So thank you so very much. Be looking out for the next Cultivating Ideas. Usama Malik, one of our staff, will be presenting on the creativity of storytelling and really how we can engage with materials and content and imagery to tell better stories in our presentations. So thank you all so much for coming. Melissa, thank you again, truly. Take care, everyone. You have a fantastic day.